Alright, so Ethanbaron, V.Nusjuro, Egghead analysis. Just like the Warcry one, we're going to break down all his feats and explain how strong I think he is by the end of it. Of course, chapter he makes his appearance is 1110, same with the rest of the Gorosei outside Saturn. He shows up in his demonic horse form. He represents the Bakotsu yokai, if you want to do some research into that. Basically takes the form of this skeletal horse. Now the first thing we see from Ethan is him showcasing his speed and observation prowess, whether this be observation Aki or some innate ability. We don't really know. It seems like observation Aki to me. He scans through the island and pinpoints where all the pacifistas are, and he starts taking them out one by one. It shows that he has great symbiosis between his own and hybrid form, although I guess we don't know if they're devil fruits, but I'm still going to refer to it as that for the sake of simplicity. So he rushes down this pacifista, and the thing that's so impressive about this, because I mean obviously we've seen characters taking out pacifistas, you know, all this time, but he's doing so in a way that they can salvage them. So he's not destroying them so they don't lose money. He's only freezing them and freezing up their circuits so they can still be reused after the arc. Also, it does seem that he went invisible from the perspective of some of these Marines, as you get a shot of them looking at the pacifistas. They're completely confused how it was taken down, and they don't see Ethan. This happens almost in every arc. I've talked about it. A lot of people talk about like Sanji going invisible, and this isn't going to be a Sanji hate thing, and it's never meant to be that way, although there's going to be some things Sanji fans aren't going to like later. But characters go invisible in One Piece all the time. Like Luffy did it in Whole Cake Island, which is actually a great example because it's like all the fodder couldn't see it, but Katakuri could see it because Katakuri was faster at that time, faster than Luffy. So anybody that's in the same speed tier or faster is going to be able to see this movement. So somebody hypothetically is faster than Sanji, like obviously like somebody like Kizaru is going to be able to see that movement. Luffy'd be able to see that movement, etc, etc, etc. There's also differences between perception speed and reaction speed anyway, so characters usually have higher perception than they do reaction, higher perception and reaction than they do movement. A great example of that is going to be Zoro. Zoro's movement travel speed isn't that great, but he has great reaction speed. Also, the definition of this stuff, like which was basically handheld explained, was like when Bluno did this against Luffy. You can clearly see that Luffy's talking about Bluno disappearing. Bluno says, no, I didn't disappear, I just simply moved faster than your eyes could see. That's all that these characters are doing, so it's only based on the person they're fighting, the perception of the person they're fighting. But this isn't a Sanji video. Let's continue on. After this, he continues to take out more pacifista. At some point, somebody does notice that there's an enormous horse on the shore, and a nice little cool Easter egg in the Mars panel as he was trying to break through the Egghead barrier, the lava phase. You can actually see Ethan running along the coast taking out pacifista, so it's pretty cool to see what he was up to. He got straight into action, no bullshit, right off the rip. We get an update that all the pacifista Mark IIIs were neutralized by Ethan in a very short period of time, and he basically goes on to lament Vegapunk for giving a 12-year-old girl the power to level an entire city, referencing the fact that he gave her the command of all the pacifistas because he'd never want her father to be attacking her. So at that point, you see him rushing toward Bonnie, to where he pulls up with this amazing panel. You see that he defeated one of the giants with ease, cut him down, blood dripping off the sword, and he stares down Frankie and Bonnie. At this same moment, it looks like he's getting prepared to slash Frankie and Bonnie, and that's when Sanji makes his appearance. Sanji notices what Ethan is doing, sees him from afar. Ethan is clearly looking at Frankie and Bonnie. He gets prepared to slice, and then you visibly see him say, huh. Now at this point, Sanji jumps in. This is a complete off guard, so by no means would this ever be classified as a blitz. When somebody is off guard, you're never going to blitz them. Blitzing requires you to be paying attention to your opponent, looking at them, and them having the inability to react to you in such a capacity. A perception blitz would be that they can't even perceive you or see you. When you're focused on something else, despite observation Aki, this is a constant in One Piece that I've gone through the same rigmarole for a multitude of characters. It does not matter. When you're focused on something else, your observation Aki is lessened. It's mainly for plot, but you see this like with Big Mom. She's focused on something, still gets hit with the motorcycle from Brook and Frankie. You see Kaido and Luffy, when they're focused on their fight, they don't notice the CP0 agent with the bowler hat, I forget how to pronounce his name, coming in, intervenes with the fight. You don't see a lot of this stuff. Like, it doesn't matter what observation Aki you possess. When you're distracted, when you're even just focused on something else, it's going to be lessened. So he's focused on this. He does not notice Sanji coming till it's too late, and he gets kicked square in his jaw. Now, it makes Ethan bleed, of course, but What's funny is that this is actually more impressive for Ethan in the direct aftermath of this. As Sanji kicks him, notice how he stopped the sword. We don't really know if he was slicing all the way through with it or what was the case, because we saw the hum before he was really getting prepared to slice. At that moment, you see Ethan's head go up into the air, and he transforms into his full Zoan form so fast that Sanji cannot react, and Sanji is paying very close attention to the guy. So if anything, it's going to be a situation where Ethan is blitzing Sanji. It's not a situation where he stayed in his hybrid form and then spawned out ahead. He literally turned into his own form, as we see in the next panel. The hybrid form is completely gone at that point. Now, Sanji is holding Vegapunk. Sanji is in the air, so you could say his mobility is lessened slightly, although he can moonwalk, so I don't think it would really be that big of a factor for Sanji. Regardless, I'm not really going to classify it as a blitz per se, but I'll say that this is definitely more impressive than what Sanji did to Ethan, especially given the result of this as well. I also want to say that when two characters are going to be relative in speed anyway, like let's just theoretically say that Ethan and Sanji are relative in speed. If anybody gets an advantage, you're going to be able to land an attack. That's just how fights work. So yes, when you notice something at the last second, it's not going to change the fact that you're going to get hit. Perfect example I always use is if you're playing basketball at the gym and you can always catch a chest pass, but you happen to be looking off to the left and out of your peripheral vision, you can see the basketball coming from the right. You might even throw your hands up in preparation to react, but it's going to be too late. The ball's still going to hit you in the face because you're not able to react like you normally would, because it's not your full reaction time. You don't have full preparation, and if they're close in speed, of course it's going to land. We see that this chomp actually seems to have pierced Sanji's bones. Seems like his bones were cracking. Now Sanji's eyebrow wasn't flipped here, so take that as you will as far as his durability goes in this moment, but it's not like he takes any real sustained damage from this anyway. Then the giants grab hold of the zone and Sanji goes flying out of his mouth. You then see that Ethan switches back into his hybrid form and Bonnie is in her giant form, so she goes to stomp on Ethan's head. Now it's interesting here because, like I mentioned in my work review video, you never see a situation where any of the Gorosei dodge this whole arc, but Ethan is kind of unique in that he shows defensive techniques, where the other Gorosei didn't really show any capacity or care to defend, and we know Ethan can regenerate as well. So in this instance, it's kind of a situation where it looks like Ethan doesn't necessarily want to get stomped by Bonnie. And then skip a chapter, we see Ethan was looking a different way. Now, you could take an interpretation that there was an off-screen fight that took place partially during this time, which would look really bad for Sanji if that was true, but I think that it's more likely that this is just the direct aftermath, that's just like a panel right after this, because when we cut back to what's actually happening, Bonnie looks like she's still airborne for the kick to land. You see Sanji looks like he's landing from being spit out. He lands on his neck in like the craziest way possible, like Oda did him dirty with this, and one of the giants gets sliced away. Now if you take the interpretation that it was, you know, off-screen fight, then that means Sanji got back up, got knocked the fuck back down again, while this guy's getting like 4 or 5v1. The distance is a little bit weird too, but you know, all these things, I think it's probably more likely that that was the direct aftermath, that Sanji was falling after getting hit like that. But he slices that giant. Looks like Bonnie's getting ready to connect. He kicks off the other giant that was holding on to him, so he kicked him off, and it looks like he's going to intercept Bonnie's kick in midair. He's going to try to slice her down, but Frankie jumps up there, and this is actually a pretty underrated feat for Frankie. Frankie got a lot of underrated ass feats this arc. He goes up there, jumps up there, reacts to this slash, and knocks Bonnie out of the way in time for them to evade. It's a little bit crazy, but hey, you know, Frankie's been putting in that work in the shadows, I guess. Ethan then jumps up into the air. This is kind of when they were going on about, you know, they have to stop the transmission or whatever. He kind of just jumps away from them, leaves them, and then cuts through the lava phase, which freed a bunch of people and shit. Like the Seraphim bubbles got knocked out of here and everything. It's a pretty cool moment, just a cool panel. After this, you see that he changes his focus. He starts going after the Sunny now. This is where you see Jinbei and Zoro show up. They've been trailing him, and it looks like Ethan is getting prepared to slice through the Sunny the same way he did with the lava phase. You see Usopp, Lilith, Chopper all react. They can't believe like a 5 elders coming after them. And that's when Jinbei throws Zoro, and Zoro uses 2 sword style, Restful Paradise, Rashomon, and they clash. Now you could, because I'm not going to be biased here, you could say that this is a similar situation to the one Sanji was in, where Sanji is intercepting Ethan, who's attempting to cut down somebody. In that case, Sanji intercepts what he was doing and kicks him in the face. In this case, it does look like Ethan notices Zoro and is able to turn and react to Zoro as they clash. Now, In this moment, you see that it's basically confirmed that Ethan has the Shodai Katetsu, as it's mutually understood that both of them wield a Katetsu blade. We've already seen Nidai Katetsu in Wano, so it only makes sense that Ethan has Shodai, the Supreme Great Blade. But you see that Ethan is forced to turn his whole body to face Zoro, it seems, as they start clashing, and then they get basically mutually sent flying as a result of what seems to be advanced Conqueror's usage. Now, keeping up with what I was talking about with the Sanji moment, and in conjunction with the fact that none of the Gorosei ever dodge anything, possibly because they don't feel the need to. And I brought up the fact that Ethan is one that kind of shows some defensive techniques. This is the only time throughout the entirety of the arc any of the Gorosei blocks or dodges an attack. Conqueror's Haki does seem to have some different effects on these guys than average Haki or average attacks. Obviously, the way that these guys are defeated, quote unquote, at the end of the arc is from Joy Boy's Conqueror's Haki release, where it just kind of knocks them out of their forms, sends them back flying to Holy Land by way of their ritual summonings. Now, we don't know all the details behind it, but it does seem that Zoro was getting ready to use Conqueror's coding here, something that it doesn't look like Luffy ever used in his fight with Workery, although I get all into the weeds on this in that Workery analysis video, so go check that out. It's possible that Ethan simply does not want to take a Conqueror's coded attack, because maybe Conquerors can damage them despite the regen. I don't know if that's necessarily likely, especially given the discourse I spoke about in the Workery video, but it's something that's possible and should definitely be noted in the back of your mind as a possibility. Now, what you could take from this, like I was alluding to, is the fact that you could say that Sanji, his travel speed is faster than Zoro's, which I think a lot of people agree on anyway, where it's a situation where they're kind of both catching Ethan off guard, but Ethan can react to Zoro and get ready for a clash, but he didn't react to Sanji. Again, that's definitely not a blitz. You could argue that it's a more impressive speed showing from that, but it's kind of taken away by the fact that it kind of happens right away back to him, with Ethan biting him. But yeah, Ethan doesn't have any knowledge of Zoro at this point, but you can definitely say that their AP in this scenario is relative. This is going to be a fatigued Zoro, though, that's already fought with Lucci, already fought with, you know, everything that happened the night prior, and then the damage and fatigue that's laid with him. But it's not a prolonged fight, so I'm willing to say that Ethan is relative AP wise to Zoro in this kind of setting. Two swords for Ashraman, not necessarily saying he's relative AP wise like an Ashra or Zoro's King of Hell series attacks. If you did not know, they're a whole series subsect of Zoro's attacks, like Dragon Damnation. We haven't seen Ethan Strong's attacks either, really. That's going to be the best feat for him, really, this entire arc. Obviously, like, you know, chomping Sanji and then having a pretty even clash with Zoro. You could also say that Ethan didn't really get to showcase how Zoro would react to his attacks, because he's kind of reactionary to Zoro's attacks. You could make an interpretation that he just doesn't expect Zoro to be as strong as he is. So he's in the midst of clashing and then he gets blown back. With that said, you see Zoro gets caught by Jinbei. They jump onto the ship, but he knocked Ethan far enough away that, you know, he was chasing after the Sunny from a pretty wide distance, and Zoro and Jinbei got on the ship pretty easily well before Ethan was there. You even get a shot here, pretty telling at how far, you know, Ethan is away from the ship. Now, again, you could make another case that there could have been an off-screen interaction here as well, given that the distances don't really match up and you saw Ethan rushing towards him for a pretty long period. But I think it's more likely that it's just Oda, you know, paneling shit. Concurrent events happen all the time, like I talk about progressing the story. So then you get a plot point where Ethan is closing in. Zoro talks about the fact that, hey, we have to get out of here. This is what's going to happen. But Lilith's like, yo, the horse Gramps is there. Like, that's exactly why we can't leave. I understand that your ship can accelerate, fly, but if he manages to reduce the run-up speed at all, we're not going to make the land. We're going to crash, which we get reinforced later. Zoro would step up to fight him, but basically, right as she's finishing up her explanation, Lilith, that is, Atlas jumps over there and punches her to the ground hard as fuck. Now, Zoro actually gets prepared to, like, attack Atlas here, but he gets an understanding of why she did what she did, and Atlas goes after Ethan. Now, at that point, you see that Nami tells Zoro to put Lilith inside. Now, a lot of people have been getting on Zoro's case because, oh, he didn't save Atlas, even though Zoro really doesn't even give a fuck, for one. But I mean, it's a situation where he's told to do something else. He's taking Lilith in. He mutually understood that Atlas decided to do this. She was sacrificing herself for them, clearly. You could also even say that he doesn't even know specifically what she's gonna do to fucking remove the obstacle, but she steps up, does it. He's doing something else. He takes the girl in, yells to Brooke for, you know, them to do the coup de burst, and she rushes over to Ethan. Now, this is unfortunately Ethan's like worst showing in the arc, and you could argue that it's just, you know, something that's an outlier, but when I first saw this, I was really disappointed, because when you look at what happens here with Atlas, she rushes over to Ethan, right? So she rushes over, Ethan tries slicing, and he slices off her arm. It seems to me like Atlas is reacting partially, because otherwise she should be getting sliced in half, but, you know, she reacted enough to where she only lost her arm. She zipped around, was able to grab Ethan, throw him up into the sky, and then you see he again slices. You see visibly there's another slice where he slices her again, still isn't enough to kill her. We don't really see where it lands, and then she does the explosion. So in this moment, you see that Ethan could not put her down fast enough to avoid this, could not put her down fast enough to avoid getting shot up into the sky, and she was able to react to him on a low level. Now, if you put this in conjunction with Rob Lucci essentially has a similar interaction with this, where Lilith rushes towards him, he violently blitzes Atlas and Roku guns her face off and incapacitates her immediately. So looking at these two things, and this is only a hybrid Lucci, this isn't even an awakened Lucci, so this is a terrible look for Ethan. Saving grace would be, you could argue that flying speed is different from her running speed, so she's faster when she's flying using the boots, you know, for the jetpack type of effect, which you could argue, but optically, like, it's just not a good look. With that, we see the first instance of him having to regenerate. At that point, he pushes forward, is getting prepared to attack the Sunny once again, and this is where you see that Zoro is getting prepared, as Nami calls out, do something Zoro. He's getting prepared to fight him, but it doesn't need to happen, because at this moment is when Joy Boy's Haki gets released through a meth. You see that all these guys get negged out of their forms. They get sent back to the Holy Land, and the rest was history. So yeah, that's essentially where they are. I talked about at the end of the War Crew video that I think that these guys are like upper echelon commander tier guys that have win cons with the regen to potentially beat some guys stronger than them. But at the end of the day, it is a gimmick. They are regen merchants. There's going to inevitably be a way to bypass the regen. Could it be Conqueror's Haki? Potentially. We don't really know as of yet. All these things will get combed out later, because as soon as we find out what this gimmick is, like, these guys are getting slammed. But like I said, you know, at best, you can argue that this guy has similar AP to Zoro, although that's even flimsy, because like I mentioned, he's not matching like upper echelon Zoro techniques or anything like this. And even that is not nearly enough to say overall he's relative to Zoro. That's where I think that Ethan scales. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.